The title of my paper is Sam Peckinpah and the Redemptive Border, and the quotation from Carlos Fuentes: "Each of us carries his Mexico and his United States within him, a dark and bloody frontier we dare to cross only at night." The US-Mexico border is historically and culturally and politically important to America's sense of its identity. It offers a place of danger and risk. It offers the exotic and the forbidden. It's a place where the United States encounters and identifies the other, and equally it defines itself. Nowhere is this more true than in films that focus on the borderlands, especially in westerns. The border also offers delight and refreshment. There is a popular song from the 1940s that appeared in a number of westerns. South of the border, down Mexico way, where I fell in love while the stars above came out to play. But the border is also a dark place from which terror emerges in the form of the savage, Los Indios, and the bandido, who comes forth to raid and destroy. It's possible to see the border in Freudian terms as the United States id. In a discussion on the film The Shawshank Redemption, Clive Marsh suggests that the film presents a view of salvation as being freedom from structures. And he argues that in the film it presents a view of salvation that occurs for the two key figures who find this experience in Mexico outside the prisons and the United States constraining influence. In the films that we are going to be considering, Peckinpah sees Mexico in a similar vein. Mexico and its battle for redemption would weave its way in and out of his television shows and movies, and would serve as the major backdrop for his screenplay Villa Rides and his films Major Dundee, The Wild Bunch, and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. However one views the life and career of Peckinpah, his contribution to the Western genre is widely acknowledged to be influential. He's been seen as a cinematic artist, a male chauvinist misogynist, a working alcoholic, and a rebel against the crassness of the film industry, as well as a self-destructive personality. This paper is a study of the function of the United States-Mexico border as represented in Peckinpah's films. The border is a key location in the westerns Major Dundee and The Wild Bunch, and in both films the crossing of the border is a major part of the narrative, leading to a redemptive change in the lives of the protagonists. The contemporary border is also crucial to the narrative of The Getaway, where it offers safety and a new beginning to the male and female protagonists, and is based on a novel by the noir author Jim Thompson. In Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, the border has already been crossed, but as the protagonist seeks to find meaning and purpose for his life, it is in the borderlands that he searches. And this paper will examine how Peckinpah's representation of the border can be read theologically in order to better understand his purpose. There's a thread of Protestant theology that's traceable in Peckinpah's work. The most obvious example comes from a non-border film, Ride the High Country, which also presents, as it were, a narrative of a redemptive journey. In the film, the character played by Joel McCrea says to his partner, "All I want is to enter my house, justified." The McCrea character also responds theologically to the question asked by the female member of the quartet taking the journey, when she says, "My father says there's only right and wrong, good and evil, and nothing in between. It isn't that simple, is it?" To which he replies, "No, it isn't. It should be, but it ain't." What matters to the protagonists in Peckinpah's films is a personal loyalty to an ideal, a sense of one's honour and integrity that can make a bad man good and bring some justification and redemption to losers. In the Christian tradition, redemption carries a sense of buying back, of obtaining freedom and securing the sense that one's life and deeds have some purpose and meaning. This is the idea that this redemption and justification comes as a consequence of fidelity to a task. Major Dundee has been described as a handsome, fascinating, extremely complex western. There were substantial pre-production, production and post-production difficulties, and it was released in a truncated version. It was a financial failure at the time and could serve as a case study of the Hollywood system at the time. It was only in 2005 that it was restored to something like the form that Peckinpah intended. In his biography of Peckinpah, David Weddell includes an anecdote from the actor R.G. Armstrong, who plays the preacher in the film. When Peckinpah sent the actor a copy of the script, Armstrong immediately called up the director and said, "Sam, this is Moby Dick on horseback." Weddell argues that even in its fragmented form, the film was far from a disaster. He cites the cinematography, the range of the performances from the cast, and the richness of detail and the sense of authenticity that enriches the film. According to Jim Kitses, Major Dundee is one of Hollywood's great broken monuments, a contemporary landmark in the Western. With characteristic audacity, could I pass the water, please? With characteristic audacity, Peckinpah Peckinpah in his third film attacked an epic theme of such deep personal significance that his career itself was to be thrown into jeopardy. Dundee is a man obsessed with the pursuit of the Apache chief Sierra Chariba and his band, who terrorized the southwest using the border to avoid capture. Kitses refers to Peckinpah's fondness for losers. The term used by Philip French in his book on the Western is victorious losers. And there's a book called Crucified Heroes, which is an initial study of Peckinpah's work. A company under Dundee's command has been massacred by the Apache, along with a civilian family. The male children have been taken captive, and Dundee resolves to pursue Chariba and free the children. To do so, he has to recruit a force large enough to achieve his goal, and he's reduced to raising a motley crew. He's the commander of a fort that is used as a prisoner of war camp in the Civil War. And among the prisoners is a Lieutenant Tyreen, who attended West Point at the same time as Dundee, but was court-martialed out of the Union Army, with Dundee as a member of the court-martial panel. Tyreen agrees to join Dundee on his expedition along with other Confederate prisoners, but only until the Apache is taken or destroyed. Tyreen's journey, he hopes, is to freedom. Dundee also takes on settlers and renegades, Union soldiers, Confederate prisoners, and African-American troops who are tired of just cleaning the stables. He also takes with him a one-armed Indian scout, a naive bugler boy, an inexperienced artillery officer, and a Mexican sergeant who once lived and fought with the Apache. As they leave the fort at the commencement of their venture, the dissonance is captured as the Confederate prisoners sing Dixie, the Union troops sing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and the civilians break out in a rendition of My Darling Clementine. Peckinpah's characters suffer from not knowing who they are, and above all, it is the quest for personal identity that provides the dramatic action of the film. A quest seen both in terms of a meaningful confrontation or a dialogue with the past, and a tortured struggle to achieve mastery over self-annihilating and savage impulses. Dundee and Tyreen struggle with confusion about their respective identities, and each serves as a mirror image to the other entities that they prefer to ignore. Tyreen is an Irish Fenian immigrant, a cashiered Union officer and a Confederate rebel. Dundee has fought his own war at Gettysburg and is now a jailer in charge of a prisoner of war camp. At one point, Tyreen reminds him that Dundee is also a southerner who has rejected his own kind to fight for the North. Coyne describes Dundee in his book as essentially a Puritan, and his rhetoric is that of a righteous, vengeful patriarch. I intend to smite the wicked, he says, not save the heathen. And speaking of Tyreen, Dundee declares, he is corrupt, but I will save him. Dundee's sense of moral righteousness is traditionally required in Western heroes, but in Dundee's case, it's something from which he suffers. During his mission, Dundee loses many of his men, creates an international incident by an act of aggression against French troops stationed in Mexico. His actions lead him to a state of self-disgust and personal degradation. He is physically saved then by Tyreen, and finally achieves his goal of destroying the Apache. But when he reaches the border in his retreat, he is confronted by a large cohort of French lancers. He loses more of his men and returns to Texas with a remaining handful. Tyreen is killed in the final conflict, but not before he hands over the Union flag to Dundee to take back home, and he sacrifices himself in order that the few survivors may cross the border safely. There is a sense of a doomed and only partial successful mission achieved. Dundee has, however, forged a unity out of the disparate groups who set out with him. They literally rallied round the flag, finally united by an experience of belonging that is shaped by their shared determination to fight a common enemy. The very first showing of the Wild Bunch in Kansas City on the 1st of May created an extreme reaction from some of the audiences. 30 people bolted up the aisle and out of the theatre, some to vomit in the adjoining alley. But most remained pinned to their seats, horrified yet transfixed. And one person, Phyllis Gillies, a woman in the 20s, recalled afterwards, I saw the picture with one eye at times, from behind arms and fingers spread in fright. But I must admit I was excited, repulsed, and at the same time drawn to what I saw on the screen. Another described the violence as unreal, yet too real. These reactions, Whale noted, were only to the first shootout in the film, where a temperance parade is caught between crossfire from the Wild Bunch and the bounty hunters who've been employed by the railroad to shoot them down. There was more to come, and there's no doubt that the film created a radical impact and has influenced filmmaking techniques ever since. And Peckinpah would later say that this was the film that Major Dundee was intended to be. It is also a richer film theologically. As the gang ride into town, they pass a bunch of children playing a cruel game in which they have subjected scorpions to a pile of ants. The children up the ante as they pile brushwood on the creatures and set it alight. Later the children will mimic the violent action that has just taken place in the streets of their town. There is no childhood innocence here. The behaviour of the children is redolent of the doctrine of original sin. Like the adults, the children, the young, are capable of savagery and cruelty and violence. It is beyond doubt a film better known as Major Dundee. It concerns a gang of thieves and robbers coming to the end of their time. They arrive in a small Texas town with the intent of robbing the railroad office, unaware that the railroad company is waiting for them. With the bounty hunters is Dick Thornton, a former member of the gang who is hoping to avoid a jail sentence. The robbery goes wrong and the violent shootout takes place, in which innocent bystanders are violently gunned down. As one person says, they're blowing this town all to hell. The 6 surviving gang members make their escape and head below the border to Mexico Lindo, as Angel, one of the young Mexican member of the group says, beautiful Mexico. That looks like more of Texas as far as I'm concerned, is the response of one of the Gorge brothers to other members. They gain some respite for a while in Mexico, while they stay at Angel's home village. Pike Bishop, the gang leader, muses on the childlike behaviour of the Gorge brothers, who are fascinated as some children are playing a game of cat's cradle, and it's contrasted with the earlier violent game of the children at the opening scene. The village elder reflects, we all of us dream of being a child again, even the worst of us. Perhaps the worst most of all. And one is reminded of the words of Jesus, except you become as little children, you cannot see the kingdom of God. A key theme of the film is that of loyalty and commitment. Conflict and tension arise within the gang, composed as it is of a disparate group. Pike, Bishop and Dux are the original members, and the Gorge brothers are not very bright and given to racism, particularly with their objection to Angel receiving the same share of the loot as they are. Angel, however, is committed to the revolutionary struggle of Mexico. The film is set in 1913, at the time of the revolution, and we are informed that General Pershing and his troops are along the northern side of the border. They will later cross the border to seek out Pancho-Villa. The final member of the bunch is Freddie, an old man who serves now as their quartermaster. At one point, Pike admonishes the Gorge brothers, we're going to stick together, just like it used to be. When you side with a man, you stay with him. And if you can't do that, you're like some animal. You're finished, we're finished. Sticking together is the key to integrity, and loyalty is a valued virtue. I'll cut this short at this point. Finally, the gang have taken on the responsibility of seizing some stealing weapons and equipment to give to General Mapache. And as part of the deal, which goes wrong, young Angel is taken prisoner. Pike tries to buy Angel's freedom, but it's turned down, and eventually the next morning they go and shoot down the general, and finally side with the cause of Angel, who's been murdered, in fighting for the freedom and independence of Mexico. And there's a final sort of gory scene as they affirm their loyalty to Angel. There's this other dialogue I mentioned. At one point, Dutch says, "Damn that Dick Thornton to hell." And Pike says, "Well, what would you have done in his place?" He gave his word. Gave his word to a railroad. It's his word. It ain't what counts, it's who you give it to. The Getaway is one of Peckinpah's non-westerns, but it has western tropes, set in Temple, Texas, and concerns a bank robbery that goes wrong and a chase in which the male and female protagonists run across the border into Mexico to find not only safety, but a new beginning.
That's it.
I want to go back. How do I go back? How do I go back on the... I need to go back on the... no, that's... That's just say that. In the beginning of the film, Dr. McCoy is in prison and about to appeal before the parole board. He's been a model prisoner for 4 years, but his request is turned down due to the fact that a man called Banyan is a member of the parole board, but later uses his political muscle to obtain McCoy's release. When McCoy's wife visits him, Carol, he says to her, "Get to Banyan, tell him I'm for sale, his price, do it now." So she conveys this message to Banyan, and McCoy is granted his parole. He's collected by his wife, and they go to a park where, in the sort of euphoria of freedom, they actually leap into a lake. It's almost like a secular baptism, a new beginning for them. He's required to lead a bank robbery which goes wrong on the instructions of Banyan. For various reasons, the two people who share him, work with him on the bank, one is dead and the other is left for dead by McCoy. McCoy tries to take the money to Banyan and is a bit perturbed when his wife Carol won't come with him. She says she's never been to Banyan's ranch. She'd only met him in the office. It transpires that part of the deal of getting McCoy out is that she slept with Banyan. When they have the meeting with Banyan, Carol shoots him dead, and they have to head for the border, chased by Banyan's men and the third of the bank robbers who wants the money for himself. During the journey, the couple become trapped in a rubbish truck, and the rubbish truck are dumped onto a garbage site. This is the one moment where their relationship is rekindled. The Hebrew word for hell is Gehenna, apparently the name of the rubbish tip outside the city of Jerusalem. And just as a plunge in the lake earlier could be seen as a baptism, so the rubbish tip can be viewed as a resurrection. McCoy inspects his wife's face and comments, "No scars." The relationship between the McCoys is the only positive one we see in the film. Banyan's brother works for him, and after Banyan's death, he gives instruction to dump the body down a well. The fellow gang member who was pursuing McCoys kidnaps a vet and his wife. He abuses the husband with encouragement from the wife. The marriage is clearly a poisoned relationship, and the vet finally reacts to his treatment by committing suicide. The final action of the McCoys is to commandeer a truck and its driver to take them into Mexico. The driver views the couple positively, especially when he learns that they are married. That's the trouble with the world, no morals. And he sings the praises of his own wife for 35 years. "Everything I am, I owe to her." The McCoys buy the truck for 6 times the money the man made the previous year, and he wishes the couple well as they're about to drive off. "I hope you find what you're looking for. Vaya con Dios." The Getaway was a lighter film in the sense than either Dundee or The Wild Bunch, but the final film under consideration is Return to Peckinpah's Dark Side with a Tale of Vengeance. In 1969, Peckinpah asked the Hollywood scriptwriter Frank Kowalski if he had any ideas for a film. Funny you should ask. You've got this bartender, he's over 40, got a drinking problem. He lives in some shithole apartment and he realises he's headed up for a blind alley that he's wasted his life. What would a man like that be willing to do for his last chance at the brass ring? What if he were given the choice of doing something absolutely repugnant, reprehensible, a crime against humanity, a crime against God? Would he do it? The answer is yes. The plot became, with some changes, the script of Bringing the Head of Alfredo Garcia, set almost entirely in Mexico. It opens with an idyllic scene of a pregnant young woman lying beside a pool. She appears content with her condition as she strokes herself, but is summoned to her father, El Jefe, who demands to know the name of the father. First she refuses, but when he orders his henchmen to torture her, in front of the family, she names Alfredo Garcia, and so the charge goes out, "Bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia." Benny, the protagonist, tends a bar in Mexico City where he also plays piano. He's geographically and spiritually at rock bottom, but he is given the opportunity to improve his lot financially by assisting in the search for Alfredo. He knows that Alfredo is now dead and buried because his girlfriend, Elita, was also a former girlfriend of Alfredo. She knows the location of the cemetery, so they set off to find the location. All they need to do, Benny argues, is to sneak into the cemetery after dark, dig up the corpse, remove his head, and a new life will open up for them. Elita is unhappy and uneasy about the venture, but Benny remains adamant. There's nothing sacred about a hole in the ground, or the man who's in it, or you or me. And using the analogy of holy relics, Benny argues Alfredo's our saint, he's the saint of our money. Just as Benny is about to do the deed, he's attacked by 2 Mexican bounty hunters who have been tracking him. He's hit over the head and left for dead, and when he regains consciousness, he discovers that Elita has been murdered and the head had been taken. Overcome with grief and self-loathing and anger, he embarks on a bloody crusade of vengeance, murder and mayhem, in which he recovers the head and kills his way to El Jefe's headquarters. And along the journey, there's this macabre relationship that develops between Benny and the head he's carrying in the sack. He and Alfredo become friends. He shares his thoughts with the head. He arrives at El Jefe's rancho just as Alfredo's child is being baptized, and he is offered the bounty. But El Jefe makes it perfectly clear he doesn't want to look at the head. Throw it to the pigs, he orders Benny, who refuses. 16 people are dead because of him, because of me, because of you. One was a very good friend of mine. There's an existential moment when Benny hesitates with the gun pointed at El Jefe, but the girl urges him to kill the father. He does so, and as he leaves, he gives the girl a pendant with Alfredo's photo inside. You take care of the boy, I'll take care of the father. Come on, Al, we're going home. Originally, the film was to have ended with Benny making good his escape. But the ending that was used was, he dies in a hail of bullets after smashing through the closed rancho gates. We are left, though, with the reflection. Has Benny gone to his home justified? Thank you. Probably don't have time for questions, do we?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you go. No, please.
No fighting, no fighting.
I was wondering how the Mexican Americans are, well, take this type of movies and how they are depicted, and how the critics, the Mexican American, the Chicano critics, look at these movies and the role portrayed or played by Mexicans.
Yeah.
Because it's a movie, I didn't know the author, but for what I see is, it's about the border. Many of the films are in the border or they're set in Mexico. So how the Mexican Americans see this?
Yeah. But it depends very much on the films and the directors. There's a film which I'm trying to remember now, starring Burt Lancaster and Gary Cooper, in which they play American mercenaries, serving the American Mexican rebels during the Civil War.
With Sarah Montiel, I think.
Sorry?
Sarah Montiel, a Spanish actress.
Yes. The Mexican government was so offended by that film. Yeah. Because it gave the impression that the Mexicans couldn't sort it out themselves. They needed the Americans. When the film The Magnificent Seven was made, they had the support of the Mexican government because the plot was very subtly different. The Mexican villagers did depend on the Seven, but one of them was a Mexican. Peckinpah, his first wife was Mexican. He certainly had a love affair in Mexico, and it shows itself in the films. I don't know that there was any sort of violent reaction to his films. In bringing the head of Alfredo Garcia, the Mexican mercenaries and the American mercenaries are as bad as each other. It's an amoral film.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. You used this term redemptive power. Of course, that is a theological notion. Could you elaborate on the redemptive functions as pronounced in the movies, or whether the moviegoer would see any kind of redemption there at all? If they go to the movie and see that, is it just a crime and a shootout, or what would be the redemptive function of these films?
I mean, I can't remember the technical term, but there's a in narrative literature, there is the process where the hero or the protagonist, as a result of the experiences, becomes a different or a better person. Compared with film where there is no change. If you take the great film Citizen Kane, Kane doesn't change at all. If you take a film like The Wild Bunch, there's a sense in which the main characters do change and become more focused on a sense of commitment.
I had a association with I teach the course on New York City to the students. Although I'm a sociologist, not a film specialist, I discuss with them the movies of Martin Scorsese. And there is important notion of border in his movies as well, as the film critics argue, as the urban neighborhoods and the gangster movies that he produces are supposed to be similar to westerns, and only the urban version of the westerns. In his movies, the border crossing is interpreted as the most dangerous act, as the act that is dangerous to the protagonist's integrity. So I guess this would be exactly, Peckinpah would be exactly on the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, well, what comes to mind, of course, is Scorsese's Taxi Driver, isn't it? Where the Robert De Niro character actually takes action. It's an act of violence, but he crosses over into the territory occupied by the pimp and the others. So in that sense, there was a Western trope in that situation.
Yeah, but we understand that in Peckinpah movies, the trip crossing the border is a precondition of redemption, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's my understanding.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, Taxi Driver, there's no redemption.
No, I rather meant the Scorsese's movies about the Italian neighborhood.
Yes.
And
of course, there's a lot of Catholic theology in Scorsese. You remember that he actually studied for the priesthood, or was intended to become a priest before he became a filmmaker. And time and again in his films, there is a clear link with the theology of the Catholic Church.